CliffCentral.com, Thursday morning, the 15th of December, and the penultimate burning platform. It's going to be a show, the best of the burning platform next Thursday. So I'm looking forward to that. But here he is with his sunglasses on, looking like he's just stepped out of the ANC's NEC. It is Kanthan Pillay. Hello, Kanthan. How are you?
I'm great. I was at the wake for Ruyter this morning. He's now the great white nope, as I said yesterday.
Shame. Although I don't think there are going to be that many people to kind of wave him on his way as he exits the what do they call it, Megawatt Park building.
Yeah, actually, it's mega what the fuck park. So
you have to wait. You have to wait for it to be 5 minutes past the hour before you start swearing.
Good point. Yeah, because
5
otherwise
minutes
we get
past the hour.
Don't we get deplatformed or demonetized or something by? Yeah, we do. Pumi's right.
You know what Eskom says, Pumi? Power may not go off or on at exactly the time on the schedule.
Just
exactly. There we go.
Just 5 minutes. Can we just?
So did you
start
see
with a little bit of decorum?
Well, let's start with some decorum. Let's go to one of our favorite ministers who tweeted about Andre de Ruyter leaving Eskom. Here's what he had to say.
This must be him back.
It can only be.
He says, Eskom CEO resignation give us an opportunity to get a well-informed person about Eskom challenges. Great news indeed. The scariest thing about this tweet, which is so stupid and incompetent and fraudulent, is that there are 2,000, and this is as of just now, 2,484 people who liked it. I want to meet those people. And that would be interesting.
You know, do you think
some of his best friends are bots, guys? Can we just understand this?
That's true. By the way, those bots were going crazy for Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. Huh? It's interesting. Whoever's paying them is definitely on her side.
Bona, there's so many things. This is why Lesotho must leave us alone.
All right, let's start. I mean, Kanthan, are you concerned about Lesotho invading us and claiming this territory, which they passed a resolution in their parliament yesterday, deciding that the Free State, parts of the Eastern Cape, parts of KwaZulu-Natal, parts of Mpumalanga
and the Northern Cape, parts of the Northern Cape too,
and the Northern Cape also now belong to them, the Kingdom of Lesotho. What do we think about that?
Well, they couldn't possibly do a worse job than our lot, so I say bring it.
So you're saying we're willing to try Lesotho?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, frankly, at this point, look, Zimbabwe could walk across the border and invade us. We have the most incompetent military in the world. We've spoken about this on the show before.
Yes.
We are the only military in the world where the military is allowed to strike, okay, where they get danger pay for hazardous working conditions. These guys couldn't pass a flippant physical. So, what? I'm not fat shaming. Cut it out.
Speaking of fat shaming, I was at another thing, and the former head of the army, General Shokwe, was there.
So he's still alive.
I was flabbergasted at his flubber.
Really? He is enormous.
So flabbergasted. There's a nice portmanteau word there.
Yay! I was just like, this guy was the head of, and every time I see that, every time I see the incompetence of our army, every time I see any of that, I am pleased that we are there because hear me out on this one, because it then leaves very little room for the incompetence of the current government to hold us down, to pin us down in any kind of military regime. So exactly. I'm glad that's what we have, right? Because otherwise the other side would be just too scary. I mean, there's a video now of the former ANC member Kalniaus protesting
Yeah.
with a little placard about Cyril must go, and there's like a police pushing him away, and he's resisting the being pushed away, and there's another another cater that falls over. There's a scream. It's quite chaotic, and there have been the bots. The bots have then been on a huge drive going, the apartheid is back, the police brutality. And I'm just like, y'all know
This is just,
nothing.
it's so, you're right. It's so incompetent. Listen, look, here's the general I think you mentioned. So if you're on
Yes.
YouTube, you'll be able to see this is him, General
He's
Schultz.
much bigger than this now that he's retired.
So this guy, he was head of our army. Am I right?
Yeah, he's bigger than this now. He was quite big. He was quite big. Maybe the picture, I don't know.
I don't know if that's the same guy.
It
that's
is
all
the
I know
same
about
guy.
Look, guys,
It's the same
someone was
face.
crunching the numbers recently, and it turns out that we've got something like 400 generals in our army.
Really?
And yeah,
Really?
and by contrast, India, which is now the world's most populous country, close to 1.5 billion people, sits with something like 72 generals. And the Indian
and they
military
often
is one
say
of the best in the world.
And don't they use the term "too many chiefs and not enough Indians"? Extra funny. All right, you guys
Is
are
that
making me
term
laugh
still
too much.
allowed?
I think so. I think so. But
it's
let's
the silly season, Gareth. When we
It's
talk
so
about
silly.
these serious things, we've got to take the piss, because
We-
it's frankly, it's the only way as South Africans that we actually manage to cope with all of this stuff.
There were quite a number of generals at this event that I was at. It was quite scary. But also kind of gave me
All right,
it really does give me heart that we don't have
I
any
agree with
prospect
you.
of any kind of military.
There'll be no coup d'etat or military junta in this country, right? That's impossible.
Even
because
if
these
you
guys
see
are
Lindiwe
all over there.
Sisulu in her, even if you see Lindiwe Sisulu in her military fades and her like high-heeled Converse military
No
boots.
chance. She would.
Nah.
You know what would probably happen is that the military, if they did decide to arrange a coup, their vehicles would break down on the way to the Union buildings or whatever. It would just be a hilarious disaster. So I had no idea we have so many generals in this country. We have learned something already this morning. We've learned that Lesotho, if they do invade us, we should probably just let them take over, which I think is hilarious. Amir makes an interesting point here. Amir says there are more Basotho in the Free State than in Lesotho itself. There are more Setswana in Northwest than in Botswana. There are more Siswati in Mpumalanga than in Eswatini. These are interesting facts.
And there are more Shona and Ndebele in South Africa than in Zimbabwe. That's okay. We're good with this.
This country, I'm telling you, there is not a dull day. So what do you guys think of this de Ruyter situation? I mean, Pumi's given her perspective to some degree, but I know she's saved most of it for the Burning Platform. And Canton, we haven't heard from you. What do you think of what's going on there?
Look, I actually feel for the guy in a way.
Really?
And the reason why I feel for him is that he was never going to be able to turn the thing around. And I know I feel a bit like I'm flogging a bit of a dead horse over here, but remember that we've got the scenario where de Ruyter is forced to sell a product at a price that is lower than what it costs him to produce it.
Yeah, correct.
So he's got to actually turn Eskom around while selling electricity at a loss. And how the hell do you do that? It's impossible. Now, the reason why he can't actually push up the prices to what they're supposed to be is because of the fact that the price setting is not done by Eskom, it's done by NERSA. And so, well, we're never going to be able to, guys, we'll never be able to get this thing fixed. The other thing he's not able to do, he's not able to cut off all of the defaulting municipalities.
Mm-hmm.
He's not able to cut off all of the areas that have widespread electricity theft. And, I'll now mention Soweto, and Pumi's going to get uptight and say, not all people from Soweto. Oh, Pumi, just put a sock in it.
You know what? You're not gonna get a rise out of me.
Yeah.
You're not gonna get a rise out of me today.
Guys, but listen,
Because
no one's going to be able to fix Eskom unless we allow Eskom to actually crank prices. Okay. The price of diesel right now is at an all-time high. Thank you, Joe Biden. The price of diesel is at an all-time high. we need to burn diesel in order to keep the lights on. So
not
we
just
need
at
to.
Eskom, but we also all these people who have generators. I mean, every time the lights go out here where I live, you just hear this in the background, and
The
that's the
sounds
hum.
of Joburg.
Mhm.
The new
That's the
sounds
hum
of Joburg.
people burning diesel and burning a lot of it, and that's why the price has also gone up.
Yes, and so now we have
Which
a situation where the northern suburbs are starting to smell like the townships used to smell during the apartheid era. Because remember, during the apartheid era, wherever we went in the townships, there were just coal stoves that were
That's right.
actually the sole source of fuel and heat in most of the households. And
By
and
the
so
way,
there was this constant smell of coal throughout the townships.
where are the green lobby from overseas coming here and telling people, "Oh, you're polluting everything"? You see, when it
Oh
comes
no,
to the
we've got Nick Headley who's single-handedly driving that.
oh really,
Yeah, I want to know
we
which
should,
NGOs are paying him because yeah,
aha,
he's clearly getting big bucks to push this agenda.
maybe we should send the army round to investigate because
They're out of fuel, Gareth. Come on.
this army.
which speaking of fuel brings us, did you see the video of your venerable finance minister at the Salga presentation? So
The,
local
Enoch
government.
Enoch Godongwana. What is he doing? What was he
Enoch
doing at Solga?
Godongwane just waxing lyrical
Hmm.
about all of the things that are the problem. Also, like,
Oh yeah.
I don't know, everybody, are they really disciplined members of the movement? Talking about Gwede Mantashe
Hmm.
saying the Ruyter doesn't want to buy fuel. He's got fuel. Gwede has got fuel. You know, I told him
Hmm.
that I've got fuel here at Petro SA for him, but they don't want to pay for this fuel. And a,
Oh
a,
my God.
a
And
supposed phone conversation where Cyril Ramaphosa phoned Enoch to say, when the announcement of the stage 6, phoned Enoch to say, Yintoni lekaka. And I was like, everybody, like, yes, this is him, but this is not at the Salga presentation. It
again,
was at every single turn. It's unbelievable how all of these individuals have got an enormous amount of incompetence. I don't, and this is what got me thinking
enormous.
about the incompetence versus stupidity versus frauds, because they sit here kind of
Yeah.
pontificating at times, which is what he was doing in Okodongwan
And
at the Salga
and
conference, with
the left,
sheer levels
uh,
of hubris. No
yeah,
other way
the
of
left, isn't it
describing
funny?
it.
It's funny how the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. Like you've got these two ministers who should be able to, in a cabinet meeting, which we're supposed to be having every week, they should be able to talk to each other in person across the room and say, "Hey, you need diesel? We can buy it from here. This is how much you have to pay. Your department must EFT my department this much, and we'll send the fuel around." They can't even get this right. Instead, they go public with why they can't do X,
Pot
Y,
shots at each other.
hot shots at each other. It's just unbelievable. Canton, any comment from you on the whole NDZ voting very publicly against Cyril and saying we've got to implement the recommendations of the report, and she's a disciplined cadre, and she's going to make sure that she stands up for the right thing. And, it was this dramatic moment, and now the EFF are busy claiming like this is the biggest thing ever, that she sided with them, of course not realizing she didn't side
while
with them.
sitting right next to Pravin Gordhan.
Well, there's a wise woman who once sang, "Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose."
There we go.
And look, I think good for her. Guys, I've told you since going back to 2016, that I thought NDZ would be a better president than Ramaphosa, and I still stand by that.
Sure.
Yeah, and
Even now.
I'm very happy for. Look, I think the best possible scenario that can come out of this right now is that the ANC tears itself apart. So this time it's a proper split. So it's not like there's a splinter faction called the EFF. There's a splinter faction called COPE. There's a splinter faction called the PAC, because this has been the history of South African politics. We haven't really had anything new and exciting happening, because they've all been splinter factions of the ANC. Well, apart from well, even if you take the Vryheidsfront Front Plus, they basically a splinter faction of the Conservative Party, which was a splinter faction
National.
of the old National Party.
This is South Africa, but you think this is the final factional break? This is
I hope so. Atheist though I am, I'm praying to whatever gods there are out there to actually bring this.
Yeah, so
do this for me and I will believe.
I mean, so she
Right.
is kind of daring. She does have nothing to lose, and she's kind of daring Cyril to do something. It's a dare
as
to
opposed
say
to
Cyril
Israeli, who
must
doesn't pitch up.
Cyril must fire her, and hopefully that will gain her some votes in the conference going forward, because then everybody's good. Or he's not going to do anything, and it's going to say to people that Cyril is afraid of her.
Mhm.
Zweli and both
Lindy.
Zweli and Lindiwe, I think, also made a political decision about kind of going, I'm not going to vote yes or no. And in so doing, what they've done is they've shown the rest of us and everybody that's going to be voting in Nasrec how spineless they are. That they are scared.
But shout
of
out to
Cyril.
Julius again. He called it. Remember, Julius said he wanted a vote by show of hands because he wanted to see who's actually going to be true to their word.
Mhm.
But then he was the first person standing up there and fighting with Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula about having a secret ballot, because what they were hoping for is they were hoping to have more people vote on their side, because now we don't know who's voting in what direction. And I think it's very disingenuous of them to all of a sudden have MPs
Hey
that
guys,
have suddenly
this
been
is Julius. Come
receiving
on. Of course it's
death
disingenuous.
death threats overnight. I was just like, come on. I,
Julius
for
will
one, love
he will do
seeing them vote
whatever
one by one.
Julius will do whatever he needs to do in order to make what works for Julius happen. That's all. We know that. It's he is as venal as they get, right? So here's
I
an interesting thing. I didn't know about this. We just got to quickly turn our attention to further north. Apparently, Amir also full of information this morning. Amir says, "Did you see the video of the South Sudan president pee himself? Shame, he's 71 years old. 71 is a spring chicken, Amir, compared to the Joe Bidens and
That's
Donald Trump.
not young. That's not old enough to be peeing yourself.
No, shame. You must be under huge pressure." I do find that this morning's burning platform is the most entertaining one I've had in a long time, because we are just laughing at these guys. Like, we're not taking it all as terribly seriously as we usually would. And maybe it is just silly season. But, I look at these generals that we were talking about earlier. I look at Enoch Godongwana in his hat. I look at Bheki Cele in his hat. I see Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, like, daring Cyril, as you put it, Pumi. And it's all kind of just ridiculous. Like, if you were watching this from afar, if you weren't actually in this country and unfortunately subject to their ridiculousness and their bad decisions, you would be laughing.
So I do think that the good thing about the mess that we're watching unfold
Mhm.
is it hastens the demise of the ruling party. If we can get it together to show up and vote, right? So that's the fulcrum, is we've got to be able, I think, on the other side, the benches on the other side, to get enough people to show up and vote. And this is why I was up kind of watching the numbers overnight, well, this morning, because of the by-election in Botsottsela, or in the Northwest, because it's
What
a
happened?
very big election where there were 27 wards that are a good cross section of the voting kind of constituents. So there's
Mhm.
enough white voters, black voters. It's rural. There's some towns, and there's a cross section of the ANC, DA, FF, EFF Also a showing of the Patriotic Alliance. Unfortunately, Action SA was not contesting in any one of those 27 wards. And all this happening in a by-election, so the thing about by-elections, why they're good to watch is because there isn't a public holiday. It's all about canvassing on the ground. So you don't get what we get with national elections, where you have a halo effect of communication that's everywhere,
Right.
ubiquitous communication on the radio, on TV, on print, and all of that. This is canvassing on the ground because it's such a small area. So what you get is you get committed voters. You get to see the behavior of committed voters, how they show up. And the one thing that is across all the wards and all the voting districts is very low voter turnout. Very low voter turnout. And we've spoken about this before, where I've said where there's low voter turnout works in the favor of the ANC. They want that because the less people show up, it's because that's the flaw in democracy. Is it's really not about the fact that because nobody voted, nobody becomes the councillor. No. If three people vote, the three people that they voted for. So I'm going to give you some numbers. Give me a second. Let me pull up some of these numbers. My favorite people to watch. So the IEC app has been reporting the numbers overnight. But also our favorites, Davis Scholz has been tweeting the numbers, and so has Wayne Sussman. They've been tweeting the numbers.
Cool.
And the EFF has gained quite a lot of voters from the ANC. The DA is holding steady. The IFP has made some inroads in that space, So, and wonderfully though, is the ANC has been horrifically down across the board. They are down. They may get to keep some of those wards and they may get to keep the mayorship because the numbers were that low, but they're still quite down. And what it would mean is it would mean that we get to see what a coalition will look like and work like. What the ANC, because they have, kind of in the low 40s and in the mid 40s, they can create a coalition and govern, and the opposition doesn't have enough numbers in order to do what they did here in Joburg, where they become a coalition and govern. So it'll be interesting to see who the ANC chooses to partner with in order to be able to push their policies through in those areas. Interesting.
Well, that is interesting. I wasn't even aware of the fact that there was a by-election. So I'm pleased that you were paying attention to that. And these are interesting things to watch. I'm
the ANC
curious.
is down. They're down 12% in some wards. They're down as much as 22% in other wards. So they really are sliding down.
Well, let's also remember that the IFP managed to take a ward in Durban.
Yes.
And the reason why they took that ward in Durban is because the DA didn't contest the ward. And I think that was a very smart move on the part of the DA, because they basically said...
And they did put a directive out to their voters that they must vote for the IFP.
Vote for the IFP, yes. And so the ward got given to the IFP. Remember that there's a lot of municipalities throughout KZN that are controlled by a coalition of the IFP and the DA, and those generally end up functioning, reasonably well. So Tanzini, for example, I think is one of those that works, very well, because there's an IFP-DA coalition that's ended up running it.
So the numbers have gone down a little bit as well, just from what I saw. So these are the numbers that Davi was putting out from the IEC about an hour ago. The ANC is now sitting at 39%, the EFF at 27%. So ANC at 39%, they're down 14 from last year. So in 2021, they've lost 14%. EFF has gone up.
Yeah, the EFF, that is
28.
28% is very good for the EFF. I mean,
it's a very good showing in a rural district, which they have really they've done very well in kind of metropolitan areas. They struggle in the rural areas.
I thought the EFF had reached the ceiling in the last election, and because they've been, really just rabble rousers and noisemakers. that they weren't really going to have the kind of impact that this number suggests. Do you think that
So
this is
they haven't had the money. You see, they haven't had the money to do what they were able to do in Ditsobotla, I think is how you say it. They were there. This past weekend, they were on the ground in full force. Julius Malema had a rally there over the weekend. So,
Okay.
and that's why I'm saying what you get to see in this kind of a by-election is you get to see what on the ground canvassing can do for a party.
Now, what we talk about, the kind of likely coalitions that happen in KZN between the IFP and the DA, but who would the EFF partner with in a place like Northwest? Would they partner with the ANC there? Would they?
Of course they would. Because you've got to think about, look at what's happened in eThekwini over the past week. The big reporting with what's happened in the municipality of eThekwini. The ANC and the EFF have voted together to
remove the deputy mayor
and get
Yes.
bonuses
Uh-huh.
and sign off on bonuses.
Oh, great.
Performance bonuses. There's no money to fix the sewage system. There's no money to fix the sewage problem. There was no money to fix the beachfront, but there was money for bonuses.
Oh my God.
And they voted together for that. Performance bonus, not just a bonus, performance bonus.
You know, my laughter just dried up. I don't know about you guys, but I was having a lot of fun before that came up. Now I'm annoyed. So what do we think of when we look back on this year in particular? There's quite a lot of history here, and you've already mentioned Davi and Wayne, who've been on the show. We've had members of various political parties join us. We've spoken to people who are activists on the ground. Last week we spoke to Magda, who represents kind of a business point of view. Out of all these people that we've spoken to this year, it's interesting to me that we reach out to everybody. Like, we've tried with the ANC from day one, and the only guy who eventually did come on was Dada Morero. Remember this year, and Dada was, of course, running then for his position in Gauteng and in Johannesburg.
Regional chairperson.
Correct, and he managed for a little while to have ousted Mpopalatse, who was also a guest on the show. But other than him, these ANC guys just don't want to talk to anybody, and they don't want to be asked any questions in an interview because every question is going to make them look terrible. So instead, they just avoid this stuff. I mean, you don't even see them doing interviews on the SABC anymore.
It's one thing avoiding conversations with us. It's another thing avoiding conversations with the voters. I think, Pumi, you nailed it in terms of why the EFF has been making those inroads, because they've actually been on the ground talking to voters, while the ANC have just kind of been, twiddling their thumbs and trying to see what happens in terms of the leadership race.
Yeah, well, they're completely distracted in fighting each other. One of the things that kind of the open voting in Parliament also shows us is that, and this is the video that somebody compiled. I don't remember who compiled it. A video contrasting Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma talking about voting against the removal of President Zuma all those many years ago, and how it shows a lack of discipline from the comrades. If the decision has been taken collectively at the NEC that this is the party line, to go against the party line shows a lack of discipline. And yet here she stands 4 or 5 years later, voting against the party line and calling herself disciplined because of doing that. And so what
hypocrisy, right?
Absolutely. But what that also shows us is that because they are so distracted, and what going into getting ready for 2024 is that they're not going to get it together. Even coming out of this conference, they're not going to get it together to be able to have a single collective message going into 2024. Again, that's a good thing for us. It's a good thing for us. It's a good thing for the opposition.
Guys, there's been some good stuff this year, though, hasn't there? Come on,
let's talk about the good stuff. You start, Kanthan. I'll stop nonsense. You start some nonsense.
Okay, let's talk about Chris Pappas.
Oh yeah.
Okay. I think that is the good news story of the year, where you've had this guy who's been able to take Yeah, the
Municipality.
Umgeni municipality, which has Howick at its epicenter, is able to take a failed municipality, turn it around, pay off its debts, inculcate a culture of payment among the people of that municipality. And now he's able to tweet that if people are hot and bothered, they can come and swim in the public pools. 2 rand for adults, 1 rand for kids, and everything's brilliantly well maintained. I think this is a sign of the future. It shows what happens when the DA allows people on the ground to actually do stuff and just stop this bloody pontificating. So it's a kind of stuff that used to quietly happen behind the scenes in Cape Town. Now, of course, you've got the likes of Jordan Hill Lewis, you've got the likes of Steenhuisen, and they all come out and do public posturing on stuff that has nothing to do with average South Africans. I mean, they talk about Zimbabwe, they talk about Ukraine, and frankly, guys, no one gives a shit. I think people in this country want to see the type of stuff that Papas has been doing. And
which is hard work, and it's not glamorous. It's not exciting. It's not what politicians love to do because they like to grandstand, all of them. And this guy's actually getting his hands dirty.
Yes. So I'd like to see a scenario where these guys just end up, shutting the fuck up about everything that's not core to actual delivery of services in the country. So don't start whining on about climate change. Don't start. Just ensure that electricity gets delivered. Ensure that the roads get fixed, that the traffic lights are working, that the potholes are filled up. And guess what? People will actually then be enthusiastic about getting out and voting for you guys instead of posturing. So I think, Papas is something that kind of gives me hope. I want to see a scenario where there are more people that are being trotted out by the DA, especially, who are in a position to do that type of stuff. But I also want to see more strategic thinking, like the stuff that went down in eThekwini this week, where you actually had the DA saying, all right, we're going to negotiate behind the scenes with the IFP. We're going to allow them to take out the ANC in this particular case. And we're actually going to tell our voters, here's what we're trying to do. As opposed to what historically has been the case, that, people turn around and say, well, we have to go and contest every single ward on the ground because that's the way things work. But we also need to take another view that if the ANC ends up splitting, the DA is going to have to work with the ANC, with one of the factions, because that's the only way the country is going to run. And so all of the posturing that goes on right now about, we're never going to work with the ANC. No, actually, they need to be shifting the discussion. They need to say, they got to say, when the ANC is in a minority, then we will actually vote with them on issues that actually fulfill the interests of our voters.
Well, so this is exactly what this scenarios that the Brenters Foundation has put out. So they do quite a lot of kind of this strategic thinking and strategic planning and what options we have going forward, and they kind of did surveys. So they did surveys, I think telephonic surveys and sampling across the country on what voters think about coalitions and what voters think about 2024 and how coalitions could shift the way that South Africa is going. Because we are all in agreement that whether it's the Ruyter at Eskom or not, the problems at Eskom drag the country down. Inflation drags the country down. The infighting, the looting, the crime that's out of control, all of those things drag the country down. So what do we need to do in order to turn things around? And I do agree with you, Kanthan, that I think Papas in the Umgeni municipality has been a breath of fresh air and quite amazing to watch as he worked. And looking at these scenarios and what they do, the scenario thing is it's always 4 scenarios, and they've called it the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it is all about coalitions. It's the way that they have framed this and looked at it. And we will have a more in-depth conversation with Greg Mills. I think Dory's trying to get Greg on in early in the new year. He couldn't join us today. Is about who the coalitions would be between and how those coalitions would work out for the country and what that means just in terms of policies. Because at national government, it really is about policy and driving the bigger conversation for the country, whereas at municipal level, it's about getting my garbage picked up and getting the traffic lights working and fixing the potholes.
All the stuff that Kanthan asked Popalatse about. I mean, he was more interested in that stuff, and rightly so, than in ideology, or as you put it earlier, Kanthan, the Ukraine or climate change. Nobody cares about that stuff when they go to the polls in South Africa. I can promise you that there are probably one or two people in, one or two municipalities who actually are single issue voters on that. But I mentioned, I think last week, that I have become a single issue voter. I will vote for whichever party can provide electricity. That's all I care about right now.
Well, frankly, at this stage, Gareth, the only way we get there in a very quick space of time is through these car power ships.
What do you mean?
I mean, that's the only way that we can get the electricity flowing again.
The ships,
quickly,
the actual ships that you mentioned, which will be generating power off the coast.
Exactly,
with burning fossil fuels.
Burning fossil fuels off the coast, yes.
And we can buy those from China and India, can we?
No. Those are actually Turkish things, and remember, there is corruption involved in those contracts. I'm absolutely sure of that.
But we can handle it if we can get electricity.
We can handle that because we need the electricity to actually keep the country running and to keep the jobs
at the moment
flowing.
At the moment we have the corruption, but we have no electricity. So if
correct,
we can have electricity and there's corruption, that's okay. We can handle it. We'll deal with the corruption later.
That's right. Now, you might remember that I said at the time that Zuma's trillion-rand deal with the Russians to build nuclear power plants was a corrupt deal, but it was still better for us than doing a range of the other stuff that we were looking at. And I think that right now we need to take a very serious look at those car power ships. We just need to have very pronounced public scrutiny of the actual cost per kilowatt hour, which is ultimately what we're concerned about. And frankly, at this stage, anyone who's able to produce electricity that comes in at a lower cost per kilowatt hour than Eskom is actually charging, that's a win.
Absolutely.
We need to recognize this. I don't care who's becoming a billionaire on the side. What we should be interested in, you can provide electricity to the grid at a lower price point than Eskom is actually charging. We're good to go. We should just do that.
No, single issue voter. That's what I've become. So let's just turn our attention overseas quickly, because it has been a very, very busy year. Obviously, the end of COVID has started to become a much bigger story than the lockdowns were when they were implemented, because of course everybody thought, well, government's going to save us, and now we're seeing people suddenly holding governments accountable for the bad decision making, which I'm delighted about that they made during those 2.5 years. We also see that this has resulted in 3 prime ministers in Britain in a space of a month. We've seen Joe Biden limp through, but nonetheless limp through successfully in the midterm elections, where everybody predicted that he was going to have his ass handed to him, including Kanthan, you and I. We were wrong. I don't believe Pumi made a prediction in that respect.
No, I actually called the Senate race exactly right. I said it was going to be a 50-50 split. And that challenge is, yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay. I give you credit then. We can always pull the tapes, Kanthan. We can always pull the tapes.
Absolutely, we can pull the tapes. I can forward the text messages to you. The Senate was always going to go that way, but the House was always going to go to the Republicans, which it ended up doing. And we spoke about the fact that the big red wave actually did happen in terms of the sheer volume of voters that actually ended up switching sides. But enough of the US. It's getting kind of
okay. So let's turn our attention elsewhere then, because
right now the big thing that's happening is Kosovo.
Yeah, so Kosovo, apparently we're not allowed to have diplomatic relations with Kosovo.
Well, they're not a country because they're not recognized by the UN. There are 4 countries in the EU that don't recognize Kosovo.
Does this go all the way back to the breakdown of Yugoslavia?
Well,
and
this goes back to the bombing of Belgrade, which was circa
yeah.
99,
Hmm.
as I recall, because and it was part of the constant expansion of NATO. But effectively, you had, I think it was Bill Clinton at the time who went in and actually bombed Belgrade, and carved out the state that, like I said, there are countries within the EU that don't recognize Kosovo. At the same time, the EU is saying that they're allowing Kosovo to
All right.
apply for membership, which
I
is
need to, I need to
yeah,
understand a few
Oh,
things here. So let me
yes.
ask a question, if you don't mind. What I know about the original breakup of post Tito Yugoslavia is that Croatia was a country for Catholic Yugoslavs, or for Catholic. They're essentially there isn't much of an ethnic difference between Serbs and Croats. It's their religious difference.
mhm,
Serbians are Eastern Orthodox. Croats are Catholic. Um, Bosnia Herzegovina, as it was at the time, was a carve out for Muslims in that area. Is that correct? And
Yeah,
then,
mhm.
that's pretty much the narrative in terms of how it was carved out.
what is Kosovo, and how does that fit into this? Is there an ethnic? Is there religious? Is there a political difference?
Um, yeah, well, the problem that we have in Kosovo right now, you see, in terms of what is supposed to be happening in Kosovo, it is supposed to be having uh, self-governing status as part of Serbia, which is
Hmm.
very similar to the scenario that we had in Ukraine, where you had the Donbas regions were supposed to be self-governing within the borders of Ukraine. But in fact, what has happened is that you've had constant pressure on the part of NATO to effectively end up, shall we say, allowing the majority, the minorities in those areas to end up being subjugated by the majority government of the area.
Hmm.
So take Ukraine as as a very specific example. Obviously the majority of the country is Ukrainian speaking, but in the Donbass region, the majority of the people happen to be Russian speaking. But you have policies that get imposed at a national level that then end up um, effectively causing people to get very pissed off. The crucial point in terms of what's going on uh, in Kosovo is that it's really all about Serbia, because Serbia has consistently refused to join the rest of Europe, well, the rest um, of Western Europe, in uh, going up against Putin.
Hmm.
Which and so there's been pressure now from the EU on Serbia to say that Serbia must be sanctioned because Serbia is not sanctioning Russia.
Jesus.
Now,
We thought
understand that.
we thought the Balkans were complicated before. It sounds like it's
No, no,
getting
no.
even
Look,
more complicated now.
it's hugely complicated. Now, understand as well that there are very strong ties between Serbia and Russia, and you routinely have
Sure.
demonstrations by tens of thousands of people on the streets of Belgrade in support of Putin. The problem, of course, is that um, Putin, unlike the situation that you have in the Donbas, where Russia is a neighboring state to Ukraine, Serbia is landlocked and it is surrounded by NATO territories, effectively. So there is no way that there can be military assistance that gets provided by Russia to Serbia, simply because of the fact that in order to do so, they would need to traverse territory that's part of NATO.
Right.
So,
Okay. So
in the meanwhile, the Serbians are amassing troops on the border. You have people from Kosovo who are of Serbian origin who are routinely blocking roads that allow the flow of goods in and out of Kosovo.
hmm,
You've and yes, fundamentally it is an ethnic conflict, because I'm trying to remember whether the Kosovo people are predominantly Armenian or Albanian. They all look the same to me. I'm sorry. I'm a bit
No,
of
it's
a,
I think they're
Albania.
I'm a
Albanian.
bit of a racist that
I
way.
think they're Albanian.
Armenia, well, at least you admit it. I mean, Armenia is between the Black and the Caspian Sea, so it's
Well,
definitely
there you
Albania.
go. Thank you very much. Yes, it's.
In fact, Amir says quite rightly, Kosovo is a majority Albanian population with a Muslim majority, part of Serbia.
Thank you very much, Amir. Yes, yes.
Amir should be our
Amir,
next co-host on
Yeah,
the show.
let's get
Middle
Amir on the
East,
show. Yes,
a Middle Eastern like
he's
correspondent.
been dropping some truth bombs. So that's something interesting that's happening. So let's put Kosovo as a side because that's a hotspot. The second hotspot that's coming down now is going to be Israel/Palestine.
Again,
Well, there's a massive difference that's actually happened because for the first time now, Xi Jinping has come out very publicly to say that there must be an independent Palestine based on the 1967 borders. And I cannot tell you guys how
why would
huge
you
this
get
is.
involved? This is the first time that China's ever had anything to say about that part of the world.
Well, it's because of the fact that so Xi Jinping recently visited Saudi Arabia.
Oh,
Okay, he was given the red carpet treatment when he pitched up out there. You know, Biden went to visit the Saudis. He said that he was not prepared to meet with MBS, and MBS basically pitched up to meet him, gave him a fist bump.
Yeah.
Biden said, "We want you to increase oil production." MBS said, "Well, we'll take that under advisement," and he promptly cut oil production. Now, Xi Jinping pitches up with the Saudis. During the time that Xi Jinping is there, leaders from all of the surrounding Arab states that are part of the U.S. circle of influence pitch up and also strike deals with Xi Jinping. So there was a very brief period where, thanks to Trump and the signing of the Abraham Accords, there was the possibility that Israel was actually going to get away with a lot of the stuff that Trump came up with. So there was the possibility that Israel would have gotten away with Jerusalem as a capital. Because of the fact that Trump recognized it. There was the possibility that Israel was going to be able to keep the Golan Heights because Trump said, as far as we're concerned, the Golan Heights, which is Syrian territory, is part of Israel. But the turnaround that you've got right now is with Xi Jinping saying that we want to return to the 1967 borders. We want an independent Palestine that's part of the United Nations. And I cannot tell you guys how big this is because this effectively means that unless Biden is now prepared to take on all of the Arab world who now have the backing of the Russians as well as the Chinese, okay, and pretty much count on India also going along with what the Chinese are actually saying in terms of the 1967 borders, even though India has historically enjoyed very good relations with Israel and continues to do so.
I thought that Israel was moving to a much more kind of friendly working relationship with places like Saudi Arabia. Was that just
that was during the Trump era. That was during the Trump era. Remember that Trump managed to very successfully decouple the question of Palestine from Israel's relationship with the rest of the Arab states. So one of the things that Trump achieved was that Israel flights are now able to overfly Saudi Arabia, which was never the case previously.
Yeah.
So there were all of these things that Trump actually managed to achieve,
and open diplomatic relations between Israel and the UAE, I think Qatar, Oman. So a general kind of cooling of what has been a very, very tense and ongoing argument since the establishment of the State of Israel.
Sure. Yeah.
But China, as you point out, has never really got involved in this until now, and I'm wondering what the carrot and the stick are here. I mean, if it's just a bit about MBS and the Saudis kind of cozying up to China so that they can establish some new, or they can establish some corresponding and cooperative role in a new world order. Other than that, I don't see any direct and obvious reasons for China to have done something like this. China moves very, very carefully.
They do long-term planning. I tell people that the Chinese actually they plan in thousands of years. They don't plan in they don't plan in years. They don't plan in decades. They don't plan in centuries. They see no difference in China. It's part of the psyche of that nation that all of the dynasties that went before the Ming dynasty, the Tang dynasty, all and the other unpronounceable dynasties, going through the time of Mao and then Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, and eventually now culminating in
Canton,
Xi Jinping.
is Biden even going to last another 2 years?
Look, right now, I think that the Democrats are desperately seeking an alternative that they can put forward. But, frankly, I think at this stage, it doesn't matter. The U.S. is a country that is currently tearing itself apart. And the military-industrial complex is still continuing to dictate foreign policy. But they're finding now that they're actually not able to maintain the momentum. They've actually run out of weapons. So let me put this in perspective.
And yet they're still sending all this money to the Ukraine.
Yes, but remember that sending the money to the Ukraine, it's money that gets sent in the form of weaponry, and the weaponry is then paid for by the US taxpayers, which then goes to the military-industrial complex. But the point is that those HIMARS systems were sent across in numbers to Ukraine. And now the US is talking about sending Patriots across. Now, here's the problem. Here's the reason why this is happening. It's because they've actually, but they've run out of HIMARS. And so now what they've got to do is further actually deplete their stocks. Now, meanwhile, you have the scenario where you have people, military personnel in Germany saying that right now, if we get invaded, the best we'll be able to do is defend a small city. Because we've actually given away most of our weaponry.
But
going back but let's just go back to China and talk about the long-term plan. Now, remember that currently what's happening is that China is now buying more gas from Russia than Russia used to export to Europe through the Nord Stream pipelines. So in other words, Putin has been able to very quickly make up the loss of revenue that's been coming from the Nord Stream pipelines by selling to China. They are selling in each other's national currencies, so there's an agreement on that. Russia and India are trading in their own national currencies. Russia and Turkey are now trading in their own national currencies. And speaking about Turkey, Turkey is now poising to take out the Kurds once and for all. Okay, and what's crucial about this is that remember that the U.S. illegally occupies the northern Syrian part because they've been stealing oil. And this goes back to Trump's time. Trump basically said, we're not going to allow Syrians to have their oil. And so they pump the oil out there and they ship it to Iraq. And from Iraq, it then goes across to the rest of the world. But the result of what Turkey is now saying, because remember that you've had the Kurds who triggered those terror attacks, what was it, about a month back in the heart of Istanbul.
Yeah.
Okay. And the Kurds have basically said, well, the first thing is we're not going to allow Sweden and Finland to be joining NATO because they did not turn over Kurdish terrorists, as Erdogan calls them. And the second thing that he said is that he's going to be taking out the Kurds who have been launching terror attacks from across the border. And he wants to set up a demilitarized zone, I think, of about 30 kilometers stretching into Kurdish territory. But of course, the Kurds are backed by the US. But the thing is that he's got Russia's blessings in order to be able to do this. But the final point in terms of Xi Jinping is recognize that this was probably triggered to a large extent by Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan,
which they took as a show of strength on the U.S. side and an antagonistic one at that.
Yes, but the Chinese, the Chinese don't react short term.
I was going to say that we spoke about this earlier when, even as Americans were rushing to pull their way out of Afghanistan, that the waning, but also the just America's waning standing in
End
kind
of
of the
empire.
in the geopolitics of the world. And this is just between, and now they have two fronts. Now they have Russia on the one side and they have China on the other side. And all of these moves, long term as they are, both China and Russia being long term thinkers, right, is what they have always known is that America is their enemy. And they've always taken that posture. And every move and counter move that they make is really about ensuring that America does not have the power, firepower,
Yeah.
or enough friends to be able to back them if they were to pull any kind of a move against them. And this is
Well,
what they're doing. This is what they're doing. This is what this all does. And we spoke about this, I think, at when Biden won, when the Democrats came back into power, we spoke about this. And we also spoke about, as even as we're looking at 2030 and looking at where the money is going to be in the rest of the world. This is just all a steadfast juggernaut moving towards a more and more diminished
so
America.
despite all the things that we hear in the news, then this has been a great year for Putin. Would you say that?
No, it hasn't been a great year for Putin. Look, don't
Doesn't sound so bad.
no,
Well,
guys.
it doesn't have to
No,
be
guys,
binary.
don't get. Yeah, no, it isn't binary. Look, I think that what is true is that Putin has probably come out better than the rest of us around the world, because the rest of us, from the point of view of our economies, it's been taking an absolute pounding. But certainly, Putin has managed to sit this one out. I mean, look, the Russians right now, they've probably lost, I would say at least 80 to 90,000 troops thus far in this conflict. Okay, the Ukrainians, we know, have lost well over 100,000 troops already. And, to say that Putin seeing that as a victory, I don't think so. But I think that Putin has come out of it a lot better. But certainly, the US has taken the pounding. If you look at the US Africa summit, which has been
Starts
going on,
today.
yeah, but the US Africa summit is not going to go the way of the US at all, because just imagine this: ahead of the summit, what does the US do? They pass sanctions against Mnangagwa's son in Zimbabwe. Now, you're trying to persuade the leaders of all of Africa's countries to come on side, but at the same time, you effectively performing an extrajudicial execution against a country in Africa. So already you've got all of these protests that are happening now around the US's role in Africa. So there's the US Africa Military Command, which was effectively what was responsible for taking down Gaddafi's government
in Kenya.
Yes.
They're based in Kenya, right? Their
Yes.
bases in Kenya.
Yeah. They were also responsible for much of the unrest in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They've been a key player in terms of the cut that currently goes down in Sudan.
Yeah.
Because remember that they're there to protect the oil interests, and they want to make sure that they keep those governments destabilized so that at any given stage they're able to stake claim to that oil if they actually want it. And you've now, so you, on the first point is that you've got Kagame, who is now turning around and saying to the US head of the summit, don't tell us what to do. And you've got these calls now for the US Africa Command to be disbanded. Meanwhile, the US is now propping up the government in Somalia. And as a direct result of that, you've had a massive increase in Al-Shabaab terror attacks. Because, Al-Shabaab was relatively quiet in that part of the world. So, yeah,
Now
it's...
we do not have enough time to start and have the conversation about everybody else's interest in Africa and how they push those interests, and Africans just kind of
Well, we should.
our African leaders very much just sitting back and doing absolutely nothing, except, as we see even with our president, always going out there with their begging bowls in hand.
Yeah.
We do not have enough time to start that conversation. That is a show all on its own. Because
But let's
as
put,
much as there's a
let's put
US
that on the
Africa
agenda
summit,
next
there's
year.
a EU Africa summit, there's a,
Yeah.
you know.
Let's put that on the agenda though for next year, and we'll see who we can get on. I mean, immediately JJ Cornish, who's already doing African analysis with us, comes to mind, but there are other
And
people too, and
so
we can
one
hear
thing
about.
before we go, and I know we finish. The time is done. I do want to a little throwback to the early days of me on the burning platform, Iran. You may or may not recall that my view was always that up until such time that the people of Iran stand up against their government and rally the rest of the world to their cause, nothing will happen. And yesterday, UN Women took a stand, and Iran has now two things. Iran has now been expelled for the rest of the term from the ESOC at the CSW in the UN. One, but also South Africa abstained from that vote. 29-4, the expulsion of Iran. South Africa, one of 5 countries that abstained from the vote. Just putting it out there. So the
Keep an eye
moves,
on it.
and now that the people,
Not
the
that the
women in
UN
Iran and the people have
uh,
stood up for themselves and are rallying the world to their cause, you see a change beginning to take place.
All right. Okay, we'll keep our eyes on that one too. Listen, there's a lot that we've tried to cover in this episode. There's still probably another 3 episodes we could do, but it is the last burning platform, the last live one of the year. We will have a best of, which will happen next Thursday. But Kanthan and Pumi, thank you both for your time today, and most especially thank you to you for joining us and for listening to the show. And we will see you next week. But there is no show tomorrow either, because tomorrow is a public holiday. So enjoy yourself. We will see you later. Bye, everybody.